Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 2006 science fiction horror comedy, Slither. Now, before I get into sharing my thoughts on Slither, I want to give a shout out to Robert for requesting this review. Um, and if there is a particular film, TV show, or topic you'd like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to my PayPal. The link will be in the video description down below. Now, Slither is one of those films that I was familiar with. It was on my radar, but I never really got around to watching it until fairly recently. And I wouldn't say that it's one of my all-time favorites, but I still had a good time with this one. I thought it was a fun, enjoyable movie in a lot of different ways. I think it could have been better, and I think there were certain elements with this film that don't quite work and ultimately hold the film back from slithering all the way up to the top of its potential. But that being said, for a relatively low budget film, for the first time that James Gunn has wrote and directed a movie, it's still quite impressive and, for the most part, an enjoyable movie. And that's really what you want when it comes to films. It's called the entertainment industry for a reason. And one thing that this film will definitely not do is bore you. So it's directed by James Gunn, who prior to this wrote a lot of things. He wrote the Scooby-Doo live action films. He wrote the Dawn of the Dead remake, directed by Zack Snyder. And I think his involvement with Dawn of the Dead is a big reason why he was even able to get funding for this one. Dawn of the Dead was a hit. James Gunn was considered to be maybe a up-and-coming screenwriter and maybe a new, fresh talent. And the studio was like, sure, you got this idea about alien slugs. Let's go. Let's do it. And Slither definitely comes from a place of passion for the genre of horror and science fiction, because there are a lot of nods to other films from this genre or this combination of genres. And from a directing standpoint, James Gunn did a fantastic job directing this film in terms of the way that he managed to make the film have so much wild, crazy energy. And he also shot sequences in ways that were very atmospheric and moody, and I think really did help the film in terms of making it get under your skin despite its lighter tone. And there's some moments here that are actually quite tragic, and I think the way that the sequences were shot enabled that tragedy to really come to the forefront. And it's one of those movies where I'm not going to sit here and say it's a masterpiece, because that's definitely not the case. But when it comes to the direction, though, with what James Gunn was working with and the screenplay that he wrote, it's as close to perfection as you could probably get when it comes to the directing, because the directing is very first rate and just really quite a sight to behold. Like, you could really see that this is a director who was special, and you could see that in pretty much every frame in this movie. The sequences that are supposed to be suspenseful have a lot of real, palpable suspense because of Gunn's directing here. And it's just one of those movies that I definitely would point to as one of the better directed films of this nature from this particular decade. Now, James Gunn's direction is about as good as you can get when it comes to this kind of film. But I felt that his writing is where the film faltered in some ways. I wouldn't say in a lot of ways, because for the most part, I think the screenplay is solid. It has a fun idea, Yes, it's a little derivative of something like Night of the Creeps, but I think there are enough spins on this idea that it doesn't feel like it's just the same old song and dance. So I feel that despite the similarities, James Gunn's signature style, his own unique take on things is definitely prevalent here. Um, and for a comedy, there are some really funny moments, like the Mr. Pibb freak out, some really fun, witty lines of dialogue, some nice banter between the characters. Some of the lines don't work, some of the jokes fall flat, but that's the same that can be said for pretty much any film like this. So, Slither isn't something that's completely out of the norm in that regard. It could be funnier. I mean, I've seen funnier horror comedies like Tucker and Dale versus Evil, for instance, but it still made me chuckle quite a few times, and it was still effective in that regard. Um, when it comes to the horror, there's some moments that are really suspenseful, and like I said, a big part of that is due to Gunn's direction and how he handles things from a visual standpoint and from a directorial standpoint. And there's some crazy gonzo moments, like the woman who's blown up to the size of a massive tick, and the transformation of Grant slowly into this monstrous thing, and some really crazy, violent bits of gore, like a guy who gets cut right in half, right down the middle. Uh, very explosive headshot where a character gets shot in the head with a shotgun, and you just not only do you see blood and brain and skull matter fly everywhere, but like you see like the tongue flapping around, and one of the creatures crawls out of his head. So there's a lot of really creative stuff in that regard, although it could have been more creative and it could have had more. That's one thing that I do feel the script was lacking. More of these gonzo, crazy, insane moments of violence or horror. I do feel it's a little bit of a letdown in that regard. So I can see why some fans, especially people who are gore hounds, were like, this kind of felt a little too tame. Like it needed to have more of an edge, more of a bite to it at times. And certain characters, while they do have their moments where they are genuinely compelling, there are other moments where they just fall flat. For instance, Bill is a character who you really like, but he's not given a lot to do. Even though he's considered to be the main hero, or at least one of the main heroes, he seems like he's in a lot of ways a sidekick to other members of the cast, which I don't think is really earned. And it's disappointing when he doesn't have more standout heroic moments where he's gunning down zombies, or he's uh, blowing shit up, or some just something extra for him to do other than the little bit that he does at the end. Because even when he fights a zombie deer, for instance, he can't dispatch of it himself. Somebody else does. So that's disappointing. It definitely seems like Starla is the one who's given a lot of the star moments. She's the one that blows the guy's head off with the shotgun. She's the one that has these moments where she shows some real strength repeatedly. While Bill is the guy who just feels like he's just kind of there. And I don't really think that that's what they were trying to do, but that's how it comes across at times. And that has to do with the screenplay. And speaking of characters that are just there, Kylie. This character was poorly introduced. This is a prime example of how to not introduce a new character into a film who's supposed to be a major character that you're supposed to care about and you're supposed to root for. Because about an hour in, now this character shows up. This teenage girl in a bathtub being attacked by these alien slugs, and you're supposed to be like, oh my god, don't eat her, and you're like, I don't know who the fuck she is. So it's one of those things where it seems like there's pieces missing with this character and her story. Maybe they were loosely or briefly brought up in the beginning, but it was so brief that it was a blink and you miss it kind of moment that never really left any lasting impression. So it should have been handled better. You should have established this character earlier on in the film and made it so it wouldn't be so jarring that she's now one of the main characters, especially when you have characters like the mayor guy, who's an asshole, Jack McRady, but he's a really enjoyable asshole. The kind of guy who, over the course of the film, you could see him becoming a hero in some ways, like CJ in Dawn of the Dead. So it's one of those things where I think that was a missed opportunity to not have him be more of a focal point when it comes to the finale, uh, because I don't think Kylie really works. The character, I do feel for her in some regards because of what's going on with her family and what's happening to her and so on, but I barely know her. So it's one of those things where I don't think James Gunn did a great job at all making this character feel important. And there are other characters here that are fine, but really the main cast of characters is Starla, Bill, Grant. And speaking of Grant, once again, I really want to give James Gunn a lot of credit for the way that he wrote that character, because he made him genuinely sympathetic, someone that you actually did feel for once he goes through this transformation and he's now more alien than man. And the moment when his wife speaks to him as if he's still her husband is a really heart-wrenching moment because of the way that things are handled, and that's something that he played relatively straight. Despite the fact that the film is very tongue-in-cheek a lot of the time, James Gunn really knew when to take things seriously, which then made things feel like they had more weight to them, and definitely made things more emotionally resonant. And a big reason why the characters, for the most part, except for the ones that are not really as fully realized or as well realized as they should have been, work so well is because of this cast. I mean, Elizabeth Banks, I thought she did an excellent job as Starla, one of her best performances and one of her best characters that I've seen her in when it comes to a feature film. I genuinely liked this character and I liked her performance and I felt for her and she was believably badass when she needed to be, and I thought she had some good chemistry with Nathan Fillion. And speaking of Nathan Fillion, he was awesome. I loved his portrayal. I loved his charisma. I loved the fact he was able to really think on his feet and deliver some killer one-liners and be the controlling presence amidst all the chaos. I just wish that he was given more badass things to do. It seems like he wasn't given as much as he should have. Michael Rooker, one of his best performances as well. This was a fantastic performance by Michael Rooker. He deserves way more credit for this, considering how difficult it was to pull this off. I mean, the sequences when he's in full makeup, it's hard to top because he really successfully delivered some genuine emotions of sadness and loss and pain through nothing but his face, because he couldn't really speak. There were some guttural growls, but those were really effective too, because all he did was just bellow, because that's all he really could do under all the makeup, and that's all that Grant could do at that point. And he was able to still put a lot of genuine tragic emotion behind those guttural sounds that it was honestly really hard to watch at times because you really did feel for the guy. Yeah, he's not a saint, but no one deserves that. No one deserves to be turned into this alien thing. So you definitely did feel bad for him, and you saw that there was still some humanity there despite everything that's going on. Because imagine that. Imagine being controlled by this alien organism and your brain is still there and you're still somewhat aware of things, but you have no control of your body or really your actions because this thing is doing everything and it's forcing you to do these things against your will. That's really quite horrifying. And I felt that Michael Rooker just delivered and then some. Not only just in the scene where he's in tons of makeup, but prior to that, when he's further starting to spin out of control and he's becoming more and more monstrous. And you're seeing that process of him becoming more alien than man. Just a really standout, uh, spectacular performance by Michael Rooker. Tania Saulnier as Kylie, acting wise, she did a good job. It's not her fault that James Gunn didn't establish her character well, because she made this character work in her own way. It just doesn't work as well as it could if this character was written better. Um, Gregg Henry, love this guy. I thought he was just an absolute hoot. Uh, just relished the opportunity to play such a massive prick, and as a result, you just enjoy every scene that he's in. So, in a lot of ways, it felt like a waste considering what happens to the character. The rest of the cast, it's all right. They're there. Um, I want to give Brenda James credit because she's the one that was in all of that makeup where she's like a massive tick, bloated with blood. I mean, that was a really that was a rough image, and she sold it. She sold it really well. And other than the cast, there are some other things that are worth mentioning. The practical makeup effects when they are there are really impressive. Like the full form of Michael Rooker. Some of the bigger, gorier moments, like the head getting blown off with a shotgun, and I think part of the scene where the guy gets split in half was CGI, but I'm not 100% sure. The makeup effects on Brenda, where she's all bloated. Um, but then there's other moments, though, where it's CGI, and yeah, even for 2006, some of these effects don't really hold up that well. And you really wish that they would have done more practical stuff. There's an explosion near the end when Grant gets blown up. That one looks really bad. That definitely looks like they ran out of money or something, and they just weren't really able to do a lot in post production to enhance that to make it look the best. So they just went with what they had, and it hurts the film in some ways because you have these moments that you're really getting into, and then you see the CGI that just kind of ruins the illusion. It shatters the illusion in the moment, and it makes sequences not as strong as they could have been otherwise. The music by Tyler Bates is also completely mediocre. Nothing special, nothing really that memorable. He's definitely done better scores. The cinematography by Gregory Middleton, it's fine. It's nothing great, but it's fine. It works well enough. The editing by John Axelrad, uh, I would say that's a highlight of the film because there's a lot of sequences that have a lot of crazy shit going on, and the editing is very tight and very sharp, and it definitely does uh, help those scenes uh, slither uh, more effectively. But even though the film is only 95 minutes, there are some moments where it it takes a little bit too long to get going. So I could see why some people might be uh, a little bored by it at times, because there are moments where it's trying to build a character, or it's just trying to build tension, and sometimes it takes a little bit too long to do that at times. It also doesn't help that the climax, like I said, it's a little bit of a lackluster climax. All that build up, and it's not as crazy or as insane as you think it's going to be, and then you have some pretty substandard effects that also cheapen and water down the ultimate impact of the film's finale. But at the same time, I do enjoy the film. I find it to be uh, a relatively entertaining movie. I would agree with the Associated Press where he says it's a wickedly fun horror flick. It is. It's a fun movie. It's got some great performances, some fun bits of comedy, some great gore at times. Not all the time, but definitely has some great gore at times. And even though it's not a film that I would watch over and over again, I would say it's definitely one of the better horror films from this decade, because this decade is not really one of my particular favorite decades for horror. A lot of it just doesn't really, let's just say, float my boat when it comes to the kind of boat that I like to be on when it comes to horror. So this is more in my wheelhouse. This is more the kind of horror that I'm a fan of, and James Gunn is clearly a fan of this kind of horror as well, and that goes a long way. Passion goes a long way, and James Gunn had a lot of that with his directorial debut with this movie, and it pays off for the most part. It doesn't pay off as brilliantly as it could, but it still pays off at the end of the day. Anyway, thank you for watching my review of Slither, and as always, I'll see you later. See ya.